right. I know we've got people streaming in. Pete, good to see you all the way from Nicaragua. Joe, good to see you all the way from Spain. Uh, Great to see everybody. All right. A little bit of housekeeping before we get cranking. Kathy, can you pop up our calendar? This is our meetup calendar. For those of you who are either new or haven't seen it before, we can accommodate more people for Nicaragua, but we are less than a month away, so we would really need to know whether you want to go or not. That humanity expedition is to support Pete Shaler and his nonprofit that he runs in Nicaragua called Rayo de Sol. And we are extremely excited about that. Then we're going to be in LA, and then Dallas for meetups. Then we have a signature event. We're going to the Kentucky Derby. We're going to dinner the night before with Merrill Hodge. Then we are hanging out with Brandy Chastain for her new women's pro soccer team, Bay FC. That's in July. We've got the U.S. Open in New York in August. Our big retreat in Rhode Island in September, Head of the Charles, November, and then we've got Miami. We've got the Army-Navy game, and then we end it with Rockefeller Center, skating in Rockefeller Center. So the most important ones really are Nicaragua and the Derby. If you want to go to Nicaragua or if you want to meet us for the Kentucky Derby, just let us know because there's a lot of logistics. And with the Kentucky Derby, it may seem like it's a long way away, but it's the 150th Kentucky Derby, so it's going to be an absolute zoo. Thursday, our top advisor office hours is Laura Gassner-Otting, and we're going to be talking about what success looks like and how to live a life that serves you. Then we've got Dana Cavalier, the former performance coach for the New York Yankees, on the 30th. And then we have Chuck Patterson on the 1st. He is our top advisor for fun. So he was called by the CEO and founder of GoPro the most legendary multi-sport extreme athlete in history. And literally Chuck has fun for a living. And then we have our next Legend series after Paul. We've got Matt Higgins. Matt owns the Miami Dolphins. He wrote this book, Burn the Boats. You may have seen him on Shark Tank. He's been a guest judge on Shark Tank. So we are excited about that. For those of you that are new, the format is Paul and I are going to do like a little fireside chat for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. If you have a question, just put in the chat, I've got a question. You don't have to write it out. We'll tee you up, and you can ask your question directly to Paul. But we are incredibly blessed today to have just an absolutely stellar human being. So Paul Epstein is a 2-time best-selling author. He's a former NFL and NBA executive. He was head of sales for the San Francisco 49ers, which we're not leaving this call without a Super Bowl prediction. He was a consultant for, I think it was Super Bowl 58. He is a very passionate keynote speaker, which you'll get a taste of, I think, just in this call. He's the founder of a very cool community called Win Monday. And he's a USC undergrad and a University of Michigan MBA. And I'm sure you're riding high from the Natty that you guys won. So before we get into it with Paul, Kathy, get us started. Paul, how's that for an intro?
I I can only screw it up from here. I gotta go. Everybody, it was nice meeting you.
Well, we
Holy
thanks to
smokes.
Mike Perlow for creating that intro. We absolutely love it. How is life with Luca, who is now what 2 months old,
Two
and
months,
PJ?
yeah, grizzled vet of life. So yeah, had our second. So we're now a tribe of four. So baby PJ joined us about 3 years ago, and now Luca completes the circle, and we're rolling. It's the hardest, most humbling, most amazing leadership job I've ever had.
Well, we're thrilled for you, and we know that he is a future outlier, no doubt about it. So
No doubt.
thanks for carving out time. It means the world to us. And I know you have so much incredible stuff to share. So it's always hard for me to figure out, like, where do I start with somebody who's done so much cool stuff throughout their life? But here's where I'm going to choose to start. Uh, I've heard you talk about your dad, and I know
Yeah.
that your dad was your hero. Tell us a little bit about your dad and the lessons you learned while he was alive and the lessons you learned when he's no longer with us.
For sure. So I would invite all outliers to think on this question. Who's your hero? That person you would do anything for. You would literally walk to the end of the earth and back. And you probably have already cemented them in your mind, in your soul, in your heart in this moment. And for me, it's my dad, and he's my hero. But sadly, I lost my hero at 19 years old. And so as an only child, that puts you through a lot. You go from a boy to a man in my case. My mom goes from a parent to a partner, and you just got to grow up like yesterday. And by trade, he was a continuation high school teacher. So for those that may not be familiar with continuation, it's a kid's last chance. Kicked out of traditional school time and time again, they landed a continuation and there's no next stop. And so the hope and prayer is that they don't go on to become a statistic on the street. And there's just a lack of hope, of belief, of optimism. And there's a variety of reasons how they ended up there. But regardless, that's the environment that my dad chose intentionally after teaching in traditional school for decades because he felt there could be more impact. But it wasn't that I realized the spirit. And again, I'm only a 19-year-old. It wasn't until a few years after he passed where I'm walking the streets. I'm actually at a barbershop in one of these scenarios, same neighborhood that he taught at. And a few of his former students came up to me. One said, "Your dad was the first person that ever believed in me." Another said, "Your dad gave me a reason to think that tomorrow's worth it." And until that moment, I didn't know that there are people around us every day that don't feel that tomorrow is worth it. And that's when I learned what leadership is. That's where I learned the impact of what happens and what's possible when you leave people and places better than you found them. And at the time, I'm a sales manager at the LA Clippers. So I'm only a couple rungs up this sports career journey that I'm sure we'll get into. It's a 15-year run. This was early, but you want to talk about these leadership lessons and insights that have nothing to do with business. Nothing. It was 1,000,000% personal. And so for me, the way I reflect back on it is what gets me out of bed is impact. I'm on an eternal mission to leave people and places better than I found them because of my hero, because of connecting with his former students years after I lost my hero. And he may have chosen a classroom, then I chose a boardroom, now I choose a stage, but the impact is all the same. And so again, I ask you, who is your hero? And I call you, I invite you to dedicate this year to your hero. Because one of the biggest transformations that ever happened in my life was when I started to dedicate everything that I do for my dad. Because it surpassed this who and this why. I didn't even think about the what or the how. Like I was just like, I don't want to let my hero down. And so for me, is this an hour worthwhile? Is this an hour well spent? Are we fellow outliers together? If at the end of this hour, if I made my dad proud, then the answer is hell yes. And that's how I show up every single day. And what I've realized is I will let myself down before I let the most important person in my life down. So that's my measurement of success. That's my measurement of significance. So all these trophies and accolades, they're fine. If I'm making my hero proud, it was all worth it.
I love it. You talk about, it's funny, you talk about two words. I've heard you talk about these words just in our own personal conversations, but also in other things that I've seen you on stage and podcasts, etc. And the funny thing about these two words is in 2023, our word as a community was impact.
Mm.
In 2024, our word is purpose. And
Ah,
I hear you talk about impact and purpose all the time. What do those words mean to you, and why do you think they're so significant for us to really think about and not just be a word, but have meaning behind it?
for sure. And there is so beautiful. And I'm so stoked that y'all are all in on the impact and purpose train because actually it's literally a part of the DNA. So I already unpacked a lot of the impact, but now I'm going to connect the dots to purpose. So the reason I'm joining you here today, and I'm not still actively, presently an NFL and NBA executive, it's because I ended up taking a Jerry Maguire leap. And it was for one reason and one reason only. Back in 2016, I went to a leadership offsite retreat where I'm the CRO of the San Francisco 49ers. And this retreat fundamentally changed my life. I literally have never been the same since. It was 2 days. And for the first time in my life, it was this inside out approach to leadership, starting with personal transformation. So I left knowing my why. I left knowing my core values. And I got so obsessed. I drank the Kool-Aid so hard. I said, I don't want to let these inspirational things feel like a distant North Star. So how do I apply these on Monday morning? How do I connect these things like my values to my daily decisions and actions? Because otherwise, there's no impact. It just doesn't move the needle. It doesn't count. And so that's the measuring stick I held myself to. And so the process that I went through after this life-changing retreat, this is about a year before I end up taking the Jerry Maguire leap, but it was purpose that inspired it. So here was the process. I came up with my 5 core values and I said, I'm going to define each, and then I'm going to take one big swing of the bat per value. So per value, definition, growth, the mindset that I'm going to attack each day with. My big swing of the bat was, Paul, do something you said you would never do. Okay, well, I had a short list of things. On that list was go back to school. So you already heard where I went to school. I thought USC was that's it. Like it was early 20s, it was a party, it was great, done. Caught the good football years, we're good. So in the sports industry, the letters MBA don't matter as much as other industries because you don't really hit a ceiling if you don't have them. Like there's certain industries like finance, you're going to hit a ceiling without them. I got that. I didn't work in that environment. So for me, I said, what's the point? I questioned it, but that's a fixed mindset. The growth mindset focuses on possibilities and opportunities. So I said, all right, Paul, you said you would do something you said you would never do. So I went back to school, University of Michigan, executive MBA. I'm still in sports at the time. And the greatest ROI of the entire program was this wonderful woman named Sue-Ann. Sue-Ann was my executive coach provided by the program. It was the first time in my life that I ever had a coach. I had mentors, air quotes, before that, but they were all in the sports industry. They all knew my boss better than they knew me. So I was always kind of like, I'm going to give you 60%. Hey, Paul, how's it going? Great, 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 wonderful. Even if it's not great, right? Like, I don't know if you've been in that situation, but you're like, dude, I ain't going there. I'm not. So, anywho, with Sue-Ann, I didn't have any muzzle on. I could just go there. In our first conversation, she changed my life. Here was the conversation. She said, Paul, I know what you do. You're the head of sales for a football team. Cool. What do you love about it? What do you hate about it? What do you tolerate? So love, hate, tolerate. And I answered all 3. By the way, great questions to ask ourselves about anything, not just a job, but love, hate, tolerate. So I answered. And she said, awesome. Go deeper on the love bucket. I said, all right, Sue-Ann, the love bucket. Well, I love the people side. I love the culture side. I love being a leader. I love being a coach, just like you. And she said, on a good day, what percentage of your time do you do that? And I was like, man, I started slouching down in my chair, just knowing that I would hate the answer. My ego puffed it up to about 20%. The truth was probably 5 to 10%. I said, Sue-Ann, 20%. And she goes, okay, if I wave a wand, does that 20% go up, down, or sideways? And I thought about my boss, almost all strategy, no people. So I said, Sue-Ann, I think it's going to go down. And this was the question that changed everything for me. She said, so what are you after? Such a simple question, but it can have such profound meaning, especially if you haven't thought about it in a while. I hadn't asked myself, what am I after? I was just kicking ass and taking names in this sports world, and like the LinkedIn profile looks sexier and sexier, and it's amazing. But I stopped asking why. I stopped questioning, why am I climbing this ladder? Is this still my ladder? Is the ladder leaning against the right wall? I stopped checking in. But this rediscovery of myself, so the value of growth, takes me back to school, introduces me to Sue-Ann, and here's how this story ends. I move on to my next value because she opened a previously fixed mindset to focus more on possibilities and opportunities. What if this is no longer my treadmill or my path, even though I love the industry? What if? And then impact was my second value. My definition, I already shared it, leaving people and places better than you found them. And I asked myself very simply, can I create more impact inside of the walls of this industry or beyond? And at that moment, I mentally knew I was going to leave sports. It took me about 9 months to make the decision, figure out all the puzzle pieces, the who, what, when, where, all that. But I knew the why. And the why was because I'd be leaving impact on the table if I stayed in sports. And my purpose is to make my hero proud. So I took this leap because I felt I'd be disappointing my hero if I stayed safe and stayed comfortable and stayed in the sexy lane of the sports industry. And so making my hero proud was a big factor in taking this Jerry Maguire leap. And that's how impact drives my purpose every day.
Yes, so many people do not take that leap for a number of different reasons, but to leave the level of success that you had and the trajectory that you were on uh takes a lot of guts, a lot of guts. You wrote your first book, The Power of Offense. Tell us a little bit about why that book, and what the big takeaways should be from what really is a wonderful, wonderful book.
Yeah. So the power of playing offense, and really, it's the leadership playbook that I never had. I wrote it from a place of pain, of like, man, there's got to be a better way, because I got promoted from player to coach. A lot of us have been in that scenario. You've been an individual contributor. You're a high producer. You're a high performer. And like, think about it. Okay, business over here, work over here. Let me go back to the sports. And you don't even need to be a sports fan for this to resonate, but it hopefully will make sense. In sports, if you score the most points in a game, and we objectively asked, is that player destined to be a great coach? We would clearly, obviously answer, well, no, like context matters. It depends would be the answer. But in many cases, no, they're just a great player. And sometimes the greatest coaches were just role players. They were okay. It's the Steve Kerr, Michael Jordan dynamic, right? And like what they do as a player versus the next chapter of their life. But in business, we default to promoting every single high performing player to coach. And so the reasons why I think there's a leadership crisis and why I wrote the book, one is this default setting of player gets promoted to coach in business, which like, okay, problem number one. The research also tells us that problem number two is 58%. So almost 6 out of 10 managers have never received a single day of leadership training. I'll repeat that. Almost 6 out of 10 managers have never received a single day of leadership training. So not only are we promoting certain players into coaching roles, but then we're not developing them. So two wrongs don't make a right. And instead of moaning and groaning and complaining about it, I wrote a book. I wrote a book to say there is a better way. These are the things I wish I had known when I got that promotion from player to coach. And so it's really a 5-pillar journey. The first 2 are about leading self, so very much about purpose. And then the other part is, okay, if that's inspirational blue sky, pillar 2 is the storm, because who we are in the storm is who we are. So that's all about grit, about resilience, about tenacity, about scrappiness, about perseverance. Like that's pillar 2. So leadership of self, blue skies and storm. Pillar 3 and 4 are about leading others. And so that's where a lot of the culture principles that I believe are universally relevant and applicable that I saw work in the NFL and NBA, but now through my consulting and coaching and training, I'm like, okay, this works just as well with the Navy SEALs. This works just as well for a Fortune 100, and on we go. These are just universal principles. And then the last pillar, the 5th, is about impact and legacy. Everything we've already talked about. So from leading self to leading others to leading the future, which is leading with impact and legacy. That was the first book. And those are all the different things that I wish I had known when I got promoted, but I got no regrets, because if I would have had it easy and if I would have had the playbook and the training manual, then there's no power of playing offense a decade later. So even though it was written from a place of tension and pain and what I wish I would have had, I'm grateful that I didn't, because now I get to scale that impact and share it with millions of other people.
It's incredible. Your latest book, Better Decisions Faster. I love how it ties decision making to confidence. And Mel Robbins wrote a phenomenal cover quote for the book. Talk to us a little bit about that book, different from the first, and why confidence is so tied to making better decisions faster.
For sure. So here's the beauty. Whenever there's a whether it's books or anything else, you get to really study the first, and the more successful and the more impact it creates, then people naturally will ask you these questions that you didn't anticipate, but it's a beautiful thing that takes you back into the lab to do the research and really just study it more. So the question that came after Power of Playing Offense was, what do people that play offense do differently than people that play defense? And whether it's an individual, a team, or an organization, offense versus defense, Paul, unpack that for us. And I was speaking about it and delivering keynotes on it. But if you asked me to distill it down to one thing, I would have been very vague. And so instead of giving a vague answer and more the spirit of the answer, like, well, it's a mindset of play to win versus a mindset of play not to lose. That's an example of when I say vague, it's not bad vague, but it's more conceptual and theoretical and motivational. But I wanted to drill it down to an attribute. Like, to me, this is something like, if I can make this tangible and accessible for everybody, because if I said, oh, have a mindset of play to win. Okay, Paul, how? It's all about the how. So what my team and I did through years of research in our consulting practice, we distilled out offense versus defense, and we went through a very big study. And the number one trait of people that play offense versus those that play defense do, decisiveness. Number one thing. They are decisive. Offensive people are decisive. And because of that, they don't suffer from paralysis as much. They very much have this bias and obsession with action. So they are action over outcome. And when I say that, meaning they embrace imperfect action. They don't need to have all the information. They don't need to know that the outcome is going to be positive, because classic stuff, they don't have failure in their vocabulary. Their thought process is, I succeed or I grow. I succeed or I learn. I succeed or I evolve. That's it. Like, oh, this didn't work out. Cool. That's just door B. Door A is success and you get the outcome you want. Door B is I grow, I learn, I evolve. That's it. And so because of this decisiveness, then they also don't fall prisoner to the worst decision of them all, which is indecision. And what the studies have shown is that 85% of people struggle to make decisions, and it has a direct correlation with a negative quality of life. So for me, whereas my first book was very business forward, very leadership forward, this is human, this is life. Because I don't know if you know this, Outliers, but I'm going to hit you with at first, what I thought was a pretty overwhelming statistic. And it is true, but I actually see so much opportunity in it. The average adult, so you and I, we each make 35,000 decisions in a day. 35,000. So thankfully, the majority of those are on autopilot. I turn left into the driveway. I brush my teeth. You don't need a book like Better Decisions Faster for that, I hope. But then there's these critical few, the ones that really have a stronger correlation with quality of life. So like sports, they call them MVPs, most valuable players. In the book, I call them MVDs, most valuable decisions. So you have an MVD right now. You're struggling with it. You're maybe we're a little frozen, or we're stressed, or we're anxious, or we're worried. So we keep deferring it out. Okay, I have those too. I wrote the book to have more clarity and confidence and peace of mind for MVDs, for most valuable decisions. And I'll give a quick master class. It's a 1-minute thing, and then I'll kick it back to you, Scott. This is how confidence ties in, and this is the how-to. Because if all I would have done was written an inspirational book called Better Decisions Faster, they would have said, thank you, Captain Obvious. I will go make better decisions faster. Like, how? The $1,000,000 question is, how do I make better decisions faster? And what I found was there's no playbook. Like, I scoured the earth for like how to make decisions and like what's the literature, and like I found no consistency. And so I audited not only mine, but thousands of other decisions, and those that not just based on outcome, but those that people said, I've got no regrets. I was clear. I was confident. I could live with whatever happened. I was just decisive. And I studied that. And so here it is. The process is head, heart, hands. I call it the head, heart, hands equation. I'll define them, and then I'll tell you about the equation. Head is your mindset. Heart is your authenticity. Hands are action. So head is mindset. Heart is authenticity. Hands are action. The equation is head plus heart equals hands. Head plus heart equals hands. In other words, when deciding whether to use your hands, whether to take action, there's 2 checkpoints, head and heart. Head, do I think it's a good idea? Heart, do I feel it's a good idea? And just like when you're driving a car, you pull up to an intersection, you know exactly what to do. Green is go, red is stop, yellow is assess. And that's how the equation works. So when your head and your heart are on board, it's a green light. 10 out of 10 times, take that action. But then the opposite, no head, no heart, red light. Don't do it or stop doing it. And then when one of the two, head or heart, is on board, it's a yellow light. So I wrote the book to create an abundance of green lights in our life. I wrote the book to create the awareness so we stop running reds. And I wrote the playbook because we all need a way to conquer and navigate the messy middle of yellow. And that is what inspires unshakable confidence in our decisions.
My question was going to be about head, hearts, and hands, but thank you for explaining that. It's so powerful. I love how you talk about, your leadership journey kind of in 4 quarters. Um,
Mm.
and there's some that you're proud of, and there's some that you think you won, and there's some that you think you didn't. Talk about that a little bit, and then we'll get into the people who are anxious to fire some questions your way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, all in the power of playing offense, I talk about my 4 quarters of leadership. And I think this probably applies to a lot of us, especially us as outliers, and how I always say, I surround myself with people that have unreasonable ambition. We're just so curious and we want to grow, we want to learn and all that stuff. And, the first quarter, I felt I was doing it right. Like the first quarter, but here's the thing. Let me catch myself. I ended up doing it right, but I didn't know I was doing it right. So it's almost like this air quotes thing about like, oh, you're playing the game, right? You're playing the game. And especially when it's corporate, especially when it's business, like, oh, I'm playing the game. And if you're good at it, then you win a lot and you get promoted and you make more money and all the stuff that comes with it. First quarter, I really, based on especially taking that DNA of my dad and just being inspired by him, I did it right. Like people first was not a bumper sticker. It was a way of life. I treated people phenomenally. And We created this very inspirational and positive and hopeful and optimistic culture in environments that weren't always positive. Because I worked for a lot of dogs. Like when you talk about, like, I worked for the LA Clippers when we won 17 out of 82 games. How the hell do you stay positive in that environment? Like, I worked in some places, and I'm happy to unpack some of those stories for you because it got gnarly. But people were at the center of it all. And I broke a lot of rules because my company said, don't be friends with your team. And I was like, well, that sounds like bullshit. Like, no, actually, like, no, we're going out for beers as soon as we crush this goal. And like, we're going to go do this. And by the way, I don't think happy hour is the key to our culture. It's just something I want to go do because I love them and because like I feel connected to them. And what would my dad do? And so I did it authentically. And then I got stuck in the trap. I got obsessed going into this second and eventually third quarter where you climb a ladder and it tastes good and it feels good and your head gets a little bigger and you start to taste that success. And I fell. I fell hard, but I didn't know I had fallen. My fall was away from myself. My fall was away from authenticity. And my wake up call was a performance review when I was already at the Niners. And I remember my boss, the team president, had me come in. And I don't know if you've been in this situation, but for those of you that have been attached to a revenue goal or a revenue target, or your job was very quantitatively, you could see the scoreboard very transparently. And in sales, 100% that's how it was. So in my career of 15 years, I'm very proud and humbled to say that 14 out of the 15 years, we surpassed goal. So we had no problems performing and producing. Like, Paul's teams were rock stars. Like, I give them all the credit. I was just a captain of the ship that was a servant leader trying to ride behind them, but all the credit. But at some point that got away from me. And so what happens is, when you're crushing goals and when you're making your bosses happy because the numbers look good and the Excel spreadsheet looks right to the CFO, well, all I heard in performance reviews was, attaboy, Paulie, keep it up. Attaboy, Paulie, keep it up. So I go in this review and I heard attaboy, Paulie, keep it up. But on the inside, there was this tension. Like, I didn't feel right. I didn't feel good. I walked into that review almost expecting something different, but I didn't know why. And so he tells me, attaboy, Paulie, keep it up. I'm about to leave his office. And just as I was reaching for the doorknob, I turned around and I said, hey, Al, can you just give me one thing? One thing. I just want to get better. And he said, absolutely, buddy, have a seat. I'm like, okay, so have a seat. And he said, Paul, I'm going to give you a quote from Roosevelt, and this is exactly where you need to get better. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And he kept talking, but I don't remember a word after because I went numb, because I realized that he just told me that my team doesn't think I care about them. And you want to talk about a gut punch. Like, my heart cared, but my actions weren't showing it. And shame on me. And I needed to be called out. And I'm so happy that I turned around and asked for that one thing. And I'm so happy he had the courage to tell me. And ever since then, I rededicated myself to the Paul of the first quarter of the journey. The one that, without even knowing there was a game to be played, authentically was true to himself and did put people first, because it's just who I am. And eventually, success and career growth, I got obsessed with it. And I got away from who I'm supposed to be. And that wake-up call permanently rededicated myself to the fourth quarter of my journey, which is replicating the first quarter of my journey. And so when I speak on stage, or I coach, or I train, or I consult, or I do anything, it's all about showing up as the first quarter and the fourth quarter, Paul, because I know what it's like to slip away in the second and third quarter.
I love your passion and I love your transparency. It's so fun to listen to. We have got a ton of people that would love to ask you
Great.
questions. You ready?
Let's do it.
Alex Smith in Florida, you are up.
First off, Paul, your story really resonates with me. A lot of people in the community know it wasn't 19, but just recently I lost my dad, and he's
Mm.
my hero. And you're making me think of why he was, and how he lived his life and connected with people. Very similar. Sounds a lot like your dad. And what I think about it, like everything on a daily basis this year, I'm like, would my dad, like one of the best compliments I could ever get is when people go, "You remind me of your dad,"
Mm.
or "I'm
Yeah,
really, like your dad would be really proud of what you're doing." Like that's an amazing accomplishment. But I don't think I've asked myself that question enough, and
mm.
you've given me that, like every day. It's something that really can inform decisions, because I'm sure you make a lot of decisions that maybe you do differently, or like
For
maybe
sure.
all the time still now. Like every decision isn't going to be the right thing, but it helps kind of frame how you think about things. So thank you for that. Um, I'm curious about like just a story about like a team where you, I mean, I know working with the 49ers, or just a team where you got them, and maybe their whys were just a little misaligned. And I'm curious about like the moment you thought that they actually got to the right why, because I feel like maybe I have to imagine people that you work with, you say, okay, why are you in this? Well, I don't know. I want to provide for my family. I want freedom. And then you ask them 4 or 5 whys beyond that. It's like, well, I want to prove people wrong, or
Mhm.
maybe it's way more personal than the initial thing that it presents. So I'm curious if you had a story of kind of a team or a situation that you worked with where you could tell that they really hadn't gotten there until they actually found out what it was, and what was that real why that really changed things for them.
Yeah, it's great, Alex. I appreciate it. And for one, condolences and my heart to yours. And yeah, man, just go make them proud every day. Connect them to especially your MVDs, and like, dude, you can't lose. So I'll start with that. As far as why, you bring up a good point, and here's the reality: intention is everything. And so I don't think talking about why and purpose is enough. I do think the majority of the world, it is a little bit of a distant North Star. And if you get too distant from it, then like, how do I apply this on Monday morning? Because that's what counts. Frankly, a lot of the genesis, without going into too much of the backstory of Win Monday, it came from a place of, I've now I'm a speaker, but I've been an attendee and a guest of so many different events, and even the best events in the world. And I leave inspired and on a rocket ship, like, oh, I could go take over the world and it's going to be amazing. And then Monday morning hits and my inbox, because I've been ignoring it for a couple of days, and then my family and my digital life happens. And then 1 or 2 weeks go by, and I reflect back on that once inspiring event, and poof, it's a sugar high. And we've all had these sugar highs. We leave an event like you're going to take over the world, and then poof. And so my mission was no sugar highs allowed. And I want to inspire people with ways that they can win Monday. And so that was a bit of the backstory, but it applies to what you said, because if all we do is do a why exercise or a purpose exercise, it's just not enough. It has to be reinforced constantly. And so for me, when I found myself, like, to use your words, in a misaligned situation, it was the intentionality and it was the process. Like, as an example, I would do a values journal with folks that are, so my definition, my formula for confidence is confidence equals values times action. The multiplication is how consistently you do it. So confidence equals values times action. Show me a person that takes consistent action on their values, I will show you a confident person. Period. Full stop. So how this applies to purpose, I say, well, when I started to act on my values, that's when I became my most confident self. That's when I felt most connected to my purpose and my dad and my hero, etc. So I would do something like a journal to make sure that at least once a week I check in, and I would choose one journal. And for 4 weeks, because habit formation takes 3 to 4 weeks, so you got to get past that threshold. So I would say, journal this, and I'll give you the line right now. And I've coached this to thousands, from SEALs to Olympians to you name it, like 10 out of 10 times. It works if you do it for 4 weeks. You journal. For the week ahead, I will live my value of blank by blank. For the week ahead, I will live my value of blank by blank. The first blank is a value that you choose. The second blank is an action that you connect to the value. So, 2 quick examples. Joy. I would journal something like, for the week ahead, I will live my value of joy by cooking my favorite meal. Cool. Small, simple, accessible. Any of us can do it. I'm throwing bacon in a pan. What are you doing? Whatever brings you joy. You do you. Okay, that's joy. Now let's raise the stakes a little bit. Let's say courage. is a value. Okay. For the week ahead, I will live my value of courage by having that challenging conversation that you've been putting off. You're not having that conversation because Paul said. You're having that conversation because courage is a core value. And that's exactly how this journaling process works. It reinforces connecting action to your values. You do it for 4 straight weeks, once a week, 2 minutes a week, in less than 10 minutes a month. Lives can change, lives can transform, and purpose is on the other side, because I don't view purpose as a North Star. I view it as the intentionality to live with purpose and on purpose. And I cannot say with purpose on purpose unless I connect it to decisions and actions. So hopefully that helps. Regardless of misaligned situation, great situation, bad situation, that journaling process works 10 out of 10 times.
Jeff Gample in Connecticut. You're up.
Gampy. Scott, thank you. Where is he on my screen? Oh, there. Paul. Hey, Paul. Hi, I'm right here.
Hey.
Okay. Paul, this is great. I'm making an executive decision here. We're going to extend this for 4 hours today. So, just stay on, my brother. Just stay on. So, in preparation for today, I was listening to one of your podcasts, and the Roosevelt quote was there. It's my wife's favorite quote. People don't know how much you care until they know care how much you know until they know how much you care. So that really hit me. And then at the end of that podcast, you said, stop what you're doing and reach out to somebody right now, and go to your contact list. And I did that. Scott talks about it all the time, and I don't find myself doing it as much as I should, but I did. I listened to you. I stopped. I went to my contact list and I said, oh geez, I haven't talked to this guy in a long time, and I consider him a dear friend, but we've lost contact. So I wrote him a note. I should have called. He called me 2 minutes later. He said, why'd you write me today? I was thinking about you. I love you and your family. And he said, I've got to tell you something. And he told me something that affected my life and my family, without going into what it is. But it was the most amazing connection. And I don't know if he would have contacted me that day. It was on his mind. But because that happened and I listened to you, and I'm going to repeat, Scott is always encouraging us to reach out and contact and everything else. But you hit me that moment. I stopped in my tracks and I did it. And I thank you very much for that. I didn't know much about you coming into today, but I'm certainly going to be a follower going forward. So it's not really a question. I wanted to really make a statement and salute you, my friend. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Gampy. And let me just, even though you didn't ask a question, I'll give a super fast response to this. And maybe this is a little bit of the parenting metaphor too, but the fact that you said Scott had been saying it and then you hit me that, I think every single time that we say something, don't think it's falling on deaf ears. Like in the parenting case, sometimes it takes decades. My mom always jokes. She's like, dude, if I would have known you were going to turn out this way, I wouldn't have been such a hawk. So apparently I was listening to her. It just took 20, 30 years for this stuff to kick in. But like Scott's talking and reinforcing and communicating, and then like one person says it a little differently, or maybe it hits at the right time. So I think we're all just kind of doing our part in this game of inches.
Love it. Love that you did that, Jeff. Phenomenal. Paul in Florida, you're up.
Oh man, Paul, first I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I have a page full of notes, so many insightful questions. I'm curious. I read your LinkedIn post that you kind of talked about earlier, right, about that review.
Mm-hmm.
One of my focuses for 2024, I'd say the main focus is intuition, and you've had so many pivots in your career. I'm wondering, like, what are some types of insights that you can share to kind of listen to it, but also kind of grow it, right? Because if you don't use it a lot, you don't really know where it shows up. Anything that you could share on intuition?
Great one. Wow. Intuition. Don't talk about this all the time, but I freaking love that you're bringing us here. Okay, couple things. One is decision-making is a muscle. Decision-making is a muscle. So part of what cripples a lot of people in the sense of like, oh, indecision is the silent killer and all these things, the number one way to become a better decision maker or to have better intuition is use the muscle and be consistent. And so like, it can be an intuition muscle. It can be a growth muscle. It can be a courage muscle. It can be a muscle is a muscle is a muscle. And so like use it. And now intuition, while it doesn't always mean this, you know, like you could also paraphrase it and say, like, some people might say, oh, is that like your gut or your gut feel? Which I've been asked that a lot in Head Hard Hands. They say, well, Paul, that's cool, I'm going to use your equation, but where does gut fall into this? Fair question. And I would say, well, gut is like your impulse, gut is like this intuition. Well, what drives your gut out of Head Hard Hands? And when you back away, most people will come to the eventual conclusion that it's closest to your heart. It's like when your head says, oh, keep them, but your heart knows they're not a keeper. We've all been in those situations in personal, professional life, whatever. Your gut, your impulse, your intuition is like, this isn't right. This person's not right. This job is not right. My intuition, my heart is telling me. And here's an important factor on Head Hard Hands and how it ties to intuition. If I was to ask any outlier out there, which do you think has the greater probability of changing and evolving over time, your head or your heart? So I'm not saying it's easy, but if we work together for 30, 60, 90 days, or if we sat down for a couple coffee meetings and I said, hey, let's work on your mindset. Do you think that through putting in the hard work and the unseen hours, you could grow and improve your mindset over 30, 60? Yeah, not easy, but you could. Your head can change. But are you going to wake up with a new heart tomorrow? Probably not. And if you're not, then one of the two yellow lights is bad and one is good. The bad is the yellow that will never become a green. If your heart is never going to join this decision, this intuition for the party, then that's worse than a red, because now you're going to lose all the time in this deep, dark yellow. But when your heart is in, when your intuition is like, man, I'm feeling this. I feel drawn to this. I want to attack this. But maybe your head says, well, you don't have the money to, or it's not the right time, or that, okay, let's start working on that. Because if my heart is in, which is so rare, then I can work on getting my head to join for the party. But the opposite is not going to happen. And so for me, I double down on my intuition where my heart is in, because that can become a green, versus the opposite. That's a dead end yellow.
Wow, that was so powerful. Thank you so much. I love your shirt. When Monday, I have a shirt that says no 0 days. So I wear it when I have big days. Thank you so much for your time.
Love it. Love it, Paul. And great name, by the way. That's a better decision faster. Thank you, parents.
We're going to a brand new member in Wisconsin. Josiah, you're up.
All right. Thanks so much, Scott. My question for you, Paul, is you talk about offense versus defense. And when you're talking about defense, like in the game of football, just getting aligned on defense is the most important piece. Like everything is reactive. If they do this, we'll do this. And when you look at offense and you talk about decisiveness and action over outcome, like that's, I'm going to dictate, right? I'm going to take control. I'm going to own this and I'm going to go. And so my question to you is, how do you dictate, take control, move to action, while also not having that moment where your boss tells you like your team doesn't know how much you care about them? And so how do you balance this action and decisiveness while protecting the integrity and executing emotional intelligence with the people that you need to deliver those results?
Yeah, love it. Love it. And I've been asked this, not what you just asked, but the first part of the offense versus defense. And people say, well, Paul, but then defense, it's all reactive. And I say, offense is a mindset. Defensive players, even in football, like you attack like it's offense, even though you technically have to react. And I think defense is probably a better metaphor for real world life, because I do not have control. If you do control, can't control, and influence, the biggest pot is influence. There's very few things in life you fully control, and there's very, very few things you fully don't control, but influence is this big ocean in the middle. So to answer your question about this, here's a cultural principle that I often teach, but it rocked me initially, because I was one of those that thought that all culture is a top-down thing. It's a top-down. Show me a great C-suite, I show you a great culture. Show me a toxic C-suite, I show you a toxic culture. I thought that's the way the world worked, because that's what I was exposed to, and so we'll leave that at that. But then I end up consulting for one of the top airlines in the US. They've got 120,000 employees, 6,000 positional leaders. And over 2 years, I did training workshops with all 6,000. So people in my network that knew I was working with them said, what's the culture of the airline like? And I said, tell me who the leader is. Tell me what location. Tell me what department. Tell me what floor of the building. That's the culture. Because when I would visit headquarters, floor 5, they were high-fiving. Floor 6, shh, watch out. Boss is around the corner. And to all my outliers out there, floor 5 and 6 weren't just the same airline. They were the same department, but a drastically different weather system. All culture is local, down to the floor of the building, down to the individual. So when you and I walk in a room or we hop on a Zoom meeting or whatever we do, we either warm it up or we cool it off. The question is, are we aware of our own temperature? And when you are, and when you intentionally choose warmth every single time, that's how you own your weather system so you can own your life. And so you ask the question, what do I do when my boss or the culture, which, brother, that's real. I've been in more environments where I learned more of what not to do versus what to do. That's how I can honestly describe my past. And if that's the case, I always had control of my weather system. And as soon as I was aware of it and mindful of it and intentional about it, choose warmth, choose positivity, choose hope, choose belief, choose optimism. Even though everybody else is playing defense, I can choose offense. I can own my weather system. That's how I persevered through it. And that's what I would advise to anybody, regardless of your external circumstances or environment.
We're going to go to Jason next, but before we do, I want to say hello to Scott Heathman. So the good colonel had a very significant operation last week, and here he is smiling on a Zoom call not a week later. So good to see you, my man. Jason, you're up.
Hey, Paul, absolute pleasure. Loving everything about it. So being a big sports person that I am, and obviously have a big background there, wearing my 76ers on the, yesterday being the eve of Kobe Bryant's 81, Joel Embiid comes out with 70. Obviously, you've impacted many, many people. And we talked about, your hero, the tough questions you had. I guess I was curious of what's your 70-point moment if you think back of somebody that's you've really impacted that's come back to you. And again, I know you've had a ton probably, but I was kind of curious of something that really resonated to you that you were like, this is awesome.
Yeah, it's a great question. I take it back to the impact of my dad, where that quote of, your dad gave me a reason to think that tomorrow is worth it. And I'll never forget the feeling of hearing that, and just the level of growth and maturity. Like, that woke me up to like, okay, so this is the world. I'm in my 20s, but I now have a different lens, and I can't unhear that in a beautiful way. I cannot unhear that. And the way that I approach it now is, well, there's many stories that to win the long game and like to be in the trenches and working with somebody in the sports industry, like, I think that's easier because you have months and years to prove your character and to show who you are behind closed doors. And so I think if you're just living your standards and your character is shining, that to me feels easier. It's not easy, but it's easier. Where I have been blown away is, let's say after a speech. So let's say there's 1,000 people in the audience and then 20 wait to talk after. I love the 1,000, but I do it for the 20. And those conversations, each person reminds me of that student that my dad impacted, because they don't come up to and talk to me about sales performance and revenue growth or leadership capacity. Never. Even though I might have talked about that for 45 minutes. They talk to me about how they need to reconnect with their son or daughter, how they haven't spoken to their brother or sister and so like just this humanity, this beautiful sense of raw, authentic, vulnerable humanity of like stripping people down to be like, this is who we're supposed to be. But society has made us show up in a different way because of success and accolades and trophies. And that's all cool. And without those things, I'm not on this stage, but I'm not doing it. So you win more trophies. I just think that's an outcome of you showing up at your best. But you showing up at your best is retraining yourself and rededicating yourself to the first quarter of your journey. And those 20 people, I gave them a reason where I said a few words that reconnected them to the first quarter of their journey. And that's who they're supposed to be. And so those are the stories and the moments and the memories that I'll always take with me. And that's why, like, when people in my network, that some of which are even family members and, you know, not immediate family, thankfully, but some people don't get why I love work so much. They don't, you know, they don't have the same view of professional stuff. And I'm just like, you think I have a job? I haven't had a job in a long time. I haven't had a job. I'm on a mission. Like, this is it. I'm not working right now. Like, this is just like, I'm going to do this till the day I die. And the measurement of significance is how many people did you leave better than you found them? That's it. You know, and like, what a beautiful thing to get to live. Like, just, I feel lucky to be here with you. And so hopefully, tangentially, at least, I hope I answered that question.
You did. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep.
We're going to a guy who still thinks Florida State should have won the national championship, but you know, he's getting over it slowly. Steve Thomas, you're on mute, brother.
You got me passionate there for a minute, and I didn't unmute. Thank you. Love the passion. Love all the inspiration, techniques, suggestions. One of the things I like to learn, Paul, from people like yourself that are very successful is when you have failure in your life, which we all do, what's your strategy to deal with it? For instance, you talked about the gut punch. Yeah. What do you do to get your mindset changed before you take one of your strategies on what to do after that?
For sure. So I talk about confidence all the time, and I think confidence is our currency. I believe we're only as good as our confidence. And what I've learned, especially in hard times or when bad things happen or when you get those gut punches, I've learned to shift from, because I struggled mightily with confidence before. I was never unconfident, if that's even a word. I was inconsistently confident. I had good days, good weeks, good months, bad months. And maybe you've been there too. But now confidence is dialed for 365. I consider it a superpower. And I say that with full humility and no ego, but I've gotten dialed in. And it's because of this one shift. I no longer think of confidence as a light switch. I think of it as a dimmer switch. My confidence is not on or off. I have control of the plus and minus ones. Like, so if something bad happens, that knocked me down a couple decimals. Okay, I absorb that. But like, what am I intentionally going to do to raise that up? It could be that values journal, that because I've learned if you consistently act on your values, your confidence rises. So when I'm down, I insert the process that I know will raise my confidence and raise that dimmer switch, because my confidence was never off, but it feels like it's off until you have this mindset shift. So remember, confidence is not a light switch. It's a dimmer switch.
Great. Thank you. Very good suggestion.
Our cleanup hitter is the Cal Ripken of the Outlier Project. She shows up all the time. Jerry Kleeman in Chicago.
Hey, Paul. I get to talk to you twice this week. You know what? You talked about so much inspiration that you give other people. And I'm kind of curious how you start your mornings. And I mean, I know you're busy with the kids, but where you get your inspiration to start and have a wonderful day.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And yeah, if family wakes up at 7 a.m., that's why I'm a 4 a.m.er. I do everything that's critical to my day before everybody gets up, because I know that that's when I lose control. So what do I do in those 3 hours? For one, I'll tell you about a big shift that I made at the end of 2022 that transformed my 2023 and beyond. I was given the advice, and this is kind of like, I remember the comment earlier of, well, Scott said this a million times, and then Paul, you said, and that's what. I had heard from a million people to start your day the night before. And I was like, yeah, it sounds like good advice. But I never did it. I never did. And then something clicked in me where at the end of 22, I'm like, okay, I'm going to start doing it. Because I always journaled, and I've gone through different journaling practices of course, gratitude. I could tell you all about the get to versus have to. Look at your calendar. What do I get to do versus what do I have to do today? Mindset shift. What am I excited about today? And if I don't get out of my journaling chair, my rule is I'm going to look at my calendar and figure out what's one thing that excites me. And if there's nothing that excites me, I don't get out of my journaling chair until I put something on the calendar that does excite me. And that's my rule. So technically, I'm injecting like excitement and passion and energy into every day through a process, That's what I've always done. But now the night before, I say, okay, I circle the word impact because that's what gets me out of bed and it reconnects me to my dad. And then I put, what are three needle moving activities that are going to generate impact? And I call them impact seeds. And I say, Paul, every single morning, you're going to plant 3 impact seeds before 7 a.m. That's what I do. I plot them the night before. So I kind of dream about them. I manifest them. It's all good. And I'm not a woo woo guy, but like, I know I said the word manifest. It sounds woo woo. I'm not a woo woo guy, but I get up and I got a plan. And I execute on the plan and I feel like $1 million before my family wakes up. Like my day is good. Like I'm playing in overtime right now. Y'all are catching me in hour 3 or 4 of overtime. I'm on Pacific time. Like my game ended at 7 a.m. and now it's like, man, we're just running in the field having fun, you know? And so like that's how I've chosen to structure my day. And I feel like I now guarantee myself that I've moved the needle every single morning. And the rest of it is like, hey, just focus on relationships, focus on all these opportunities. And that's how I've chosen to structure my day.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Such great practical, tactical advice. I love it. This has been an incredible hour. I'm not letting you go without the opportunity for you to be the Nostradamus of the Outlier Project. We need a Super Bowl prediction. I need the teams. I need the score. This is recorded. It will go down in history if you get it right, Paul.
49ers 35, Ravens 31.
Oh, baby. All right. There we go. You heard it. Paul, how we are a membership now of 700 people in 34 countries. Lots and lots of people will see this on replay. What can we do to support you? Obviously, go buy the books, leave an Amazon review. It's huge. If you know of keynote speaking opportunities, bring them to Paul. Obviously, you can see he's got passion and wisdom to spare. But what can we do as a community to support you?
You gave the low hanging fruit. I think books and speaking opportunities first and foremost. And then my website is paulepsteinspeaks.com. And I'm not one to ask for things. I'm one to give, but it's a way for us to stay connected. If you take a confidence quiz, which is on my website, and literally that will just introduce you to kind of the Win Monday hemisphere as well, because a lot of the resources that we share with you after on how to elevate that dimmer switch of confidence, we give you a score. We tell you 12 ways to build your confidence and sustain your confidence. So take the quiz, and that'll ensure that you and I as Outliers, we stay connected. And of course, love you, Scott. Love everything that you guys are all about. By the way, I was paying attention to your events. LA, let me know. I don't know the details and logistics, but if I'm not on the road, just let me know what that looks like and consider me an outlier for life.
You got it. We absolutely love this. Thank you for showing up for us and carving out the time. You made a huge impact. I saw a lot of people taking notes, so thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And we'll stay close. I'm not going to say goodbye. I'll say I'll see you soon.
Absolutely.